Hello everyone, welcome back to Trek A Day, and continuing on with my top 50 favorite Star Trek characters, we have number 17, Data. I've always loved so much of Data really working and connecting with me has to do with Brent Spiner's portrayal of the character, because it is a character that could have really gone one way, the other, been completely uninteresting or engrossing and entertaining, and is a character that if you played it too robotic and wooden and didn't have enough progression with that character over time, he really would have fallen off, not been one of my favorites. But if you go too far the other direction, it's not believable that he is an android and feeling that desire to feel more human, to be more human, and that attachment to humanity. You needed a real fine balance which comes across through the performance, and I think you do get nice subtle changes as things progress, starting off from the very first episode where we meet Data and things are far more robotic feeling, and it feels natural, the progression, as Data starts forming these relationships. And it was always fascinating to explore the way, from his perspective, how he defines things like friendship, becoming used to the presence of certain people. And I felt, even from a young age, that through his character, not only was there a good way of exploring what makes being human, what is the reality of the human experience from that outside perspective, but the idea of exploring strange new life, a life form that perceives things like emotion differently. And it was different than the journey of a Vulcan character who has emotions, they are just suppressed. Or even a character like the Doctor, who was, while he did not technically have emotions in the sense that we think of, even before his program started expanding, he was programmed with enough interpretation of human emotions to have, even though not the greatest bedside manner, but the presentation of being a feeling human being, versus Data did not quite have that. And I really liked that perspective of someone who had a very different thought process, a very different interpretation of events, and I think that worked very well within the friendship. So I think a lot of Data's friendships, especially Data and Geordi, are some of my favorites in TNG. And TNG, more than any other series, it was a little bit harder to kind of separate and give placings for my favorites, because it feels to me like such a tightly interconnected ensemble cast, like a real family. The way the actors are behind the scenes, especially over the years, and those friendships, they're different types of relationships and how they're portrayed on screen. And for TNG, I have a lot of nostalgia for it and a lot of feelings of, so much of why I like TNG is not always just a particular character, even though there are moments and there are favorites. It's really the group experience, how all those characters work together in an episode, that makes me fall in love with the storylines. And Data has always been one of those favorites, though, one of those that stood out in many ways because of that difference of that character, and through that lens could have some amazing dramatic storylines even early on, with stuff like Measure of a Man, and then when he creates his daughter. There are so many instances where that character and the reality of his being can be used for great dramatic storytelling and meeting with lore, of course. So I liked in the beginning, but felt he was not used quite as well later on. And even Data, once you get to the movies, it feels a little overused, but that element, and then also a perfect setup for a lot of fantastic humor. Data to me was the funniest overall character in TNG, especially because he was not always the straight man, which I think would be a trap too easily fallen into with writing a character who does not necessarily have emotion in the sense that we think of. He was not always a straight man, and it was not always the humor at the expense of Data. You never felt it was mean-spirited. It was always the awkwardness of trying to say, when he's trying to learn how to put on a play. And I love elements like that with Data, getting, as he is evolving and getting a real sense of who he is as a person. Over time, he is starting to make real specific and conscious choices of what his interests are. and just such a fascinating character and one of my absolute favorites from Star Trek.